30 seconds, more or less, okay? Fala pessoal, muito boa tarde, tudo bem? Como vocês estão? Estamos começando aqui mais um painel, agora com o nosso ilustríssimo Deepak Sharma. Hoje de manhã, como eu falei para vocês, nós tivemos o Maurício da Grant Thornton falando um pouquinho sobre o RPA aplicado a negócios. Agora há pouco fiz uma palestra junto com o Márcio falando um pouquinho sobre o RPA aplicado também aos atendimentos digitais. E agora nós vamos conversar aqui para fechar o nosso evento com o Deepak Sharma. Vai ser uma palestra quase que integralmente em inglês, tá? O Deepak mora na Inglaterra. Eu estou muito feliz, né? Eu vou falar isso para ele daqui a pouco, porque eu já acompanho o trabalho dele no LinkedIn já há muito tempo. E eu estou muito contente de ter a participação dele aqui. E espero que vocês gostem também, porque ele conhece muito, muito da área, tá, pessoal? Se vocês quiserem deixar alguma pergunta no chat, depois em português, eu faço a ponte junto com ele aqui e espero que vocês gostem também. Hello everyone. This panel will be almost entirely in English because now our guest is Deepak Sharma, Head of Robotics Automation in SK Consulting. Deepak is Indian, but he was living in England, UK for a few years. Hello, Mr. Sharma. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks. Good afternoon to people in South America. Happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much for your participation here today with us. I'm very excited, and very happy you have accepted our invitation because you are a person that we follow on a daily basis. You have many interesting insights about RPA, AI, machine learning, and other platforms and technology. Welcome, Mr. Sharma, and I hope you enjoy it here with us. So, come on, let's do it.
Sure. So, yeah, I mean, I have a presentation deck. I've got about 20 slides, and I will try to cover it in like 30 minutes. I think, yeah, I don't need to like redo my introduction. I think you've covered it already, Hanan. I'll just crack through into the agenda of the presentation. So what the main agenda I want to talk about is the future of automation, looking ahead into the coming 2-3 years. What are some of the trends that are shaping up and how we can best prepare ourselves for the future? But before I talk about that, I would first like to talk about RPA and establish a basis of our understanding. You know, what works in RPA, what are the benefits, what are some of the challenges we face and limitations, what good practices to follow. And so once I've done that, then I will expand the discussion to look at like a broader automation landscape. And we'll look at those emerging automation trends. My assumption here is that the audience have some level of familiarity with RPA already. So I'm not going to go into very basics, but we'll cover like a broad basis about RPA. So to begin the discussion on RPA, I would like to use this implementation lifecycle framework just to give it a bit of a structure to the presentation. So this is an end-to-end life cycle, and it's divided into different phases here. So starting from planning to design to develop, then testing and release of robots, then getting into the deployment, execution, and optimization phases. So you can broadly categorize these into two areas, so dev and ops. So the dev phases are about creation of robots, and ops phases are concerned with how you operationalize RPA robots. And there are some key aspects mentioned on this slide about each of the phase, which I will pick up on the main themes from this as I elaborate in the following slides. And we will take a good 360-degree view about RPA of our understanding. So starting with the planning phase, the first thing is you want to clearly establish the goals, what value you want to create from RPA. And obviously you want to aim for a broader set of benefit outcomes, and not just achieving just cost savings in short term. And you want to benefit all potential stakeholders, as I've highlighted in this slide, to include the customer and the employees as well. Now, so many of these benefits to a business, such as reducing the cost or increasing the speed or improving the quality, these can be achieved quite quickly with RPA when you compare with other automation technologies, given the nature of RPA, that it's a low code and it's implemented in a non-intrusive way through the existing UI of the application. But it's important to consider people angle and make sure that the value for your customer is enhanced, and equally and importantly, it improves the productivity and technical skills of your employee. So based on my experience, I've highlighted some key metrics that can be used to measure these different outcomes. I won't read all of these, but I will share information about my blog site at the end, where you can read more about these individual slides, and there is an article behind each of these slides, so you can go into depth and read more about it. But I'll just wanted to highlight some of the key points here.
Mm-hmm.
So another important consideration when it comes to planning is about what approach to take for RPA implementation. And broadly, there are two approaches as I see. There's a top-down approach and there's a bottom-up approach. I know this slide, there's a lot of detail, but rather than reading, I just wanted to highlight some main differences between these two categories or approaches. So when you look at top-down, when you talk about top-down, it is an efficiency-based approach. So the main focus is cost reduction. And the aim is to identify and automate existing standardized as-is processes. And so the themes here are that this is heavily project managed and change controlled, implementation. But when you look at bottom up, so this is about innovation and democratization of automation to allow people within the business who are working on the ground to get involved and be part of reinventing existing processes with automation. And so you allow them to experiment and try new technologies. So this is a human-centric approach, and it requires investment in your employees so they can develop skills, and you give them space to carry out smaller iterative agile projects. And just to throw this idea of knowledge brokering cycle, so this can tie up with the bottom up approach, like how I just explained, where you allow individuals in a large enterprise So they crowdsource their ideas of automation. They try some automation technology and come up with a solution, and they capture it and store it in the form of an idea, and they store it in a knowledge management platform. They publish it on a platform, and those ideas and then are then shared digitally across an organization. So these ideas then, when they are available to view digitally by anyone in the organization, they can be applied to solve unique problems in different parts of an organization. And in this way, you can take those ideas into production. You can try and test and reuse and put them to life. So that is a very interesting way to look at how to push bottom-up approach. But just to mention for completeness, how would you do process identification for top-down? So you have the field of process mining now, the whole approach and the tools that come that help you do the top-down process identification. For today, I'm going to not cover that topic, but I just wanted to mention this because this is more interesting. So looking at the design phase, the main consideration is to decide what type of robot you want to design. And as I've mentioned in this slide, the two main categories. So there's the attended category and the unattended category. I'm sure people are well aware about these categories, and that unattended is more suitable for back office type processes which are being just run on a server with lights off, while attended is suitable for front office processes, and they're being executed in real time on an agent's desktop. The key point I want to highlight here is the fact that unattended bots are, they're more or less like a batch process. This is like a static stateless script which is running in the background, whereas an attended robot, depending on how sophisticated you make it may have capabilities to take information real time from a user, and it can then do some decision making in terms of what action to perform. And I call this the idea as the automation versus robotics. And let me explain more about this, what I mean when I say automation versus robotics, and I link it with unattended and attended automation. So I'm moving on to this next slide to explain this. And this is very interesting, and I think people should take a step back and try and understand this. So when you talk about a robot, so what is the definition of a robot? So if I try and find out, so the IEEE definition, what are some of the experts in the field of robotics, what do they suggest? What is the robot? So the idea is, regardless of the type of a robot, whether it's industrial or mechanical or software robot, a robot typically does three things. So it's sense, compute, and act. And the level of sophistication of these three capabilities can vary and give you varieties of different type of robots. But that is what fundamentally is a definition of a robot, that a robot can sense and take information from its environment. It can then carry out computations to make decisions, and then it can perform certain actions. So going back to that argument of attended and unattended and automation versus robotics, an unattended automation, which is running in background as stateless, that justifies to me the act part of fuller robotics. But that is only 1/3 of robotics. But once you make an attended robot, but when you look at attended robot, which is running in real time and taking inputs, when you make it artificially intelligent to gather information from the users or the physical environment, and then you give the capabilities to the robot that it can analyze that input by applying techniques such as text or speech analysis as an example, and decide what is needed to be done. And then when it knows what needs to be done, it can finally perform an action, which could be just running certain steps on certain applications on a desktop. So to me, they justify a more complete definition of a robot when I look at the attended automation. Hope that is interesting. Let's move on.
Mr. Sharma, can I ask you a quick question about
Sure.
this slide? So basically, we can say that robotics are when robots have a little human interaction, and automation when there is a little more human interaction, basically?
Yes, exactly. That is my point. When there isn't any interaction, which is the case of unattended, and it is a stateless script running as a batch process, that I see that is just pure automation, and that's just acting and doing actions, But the robotics, the definition of robotics has three elements to it. There's a sensing and computational element, which can be brought about by applying artificial intelligence. So when you give artificial intelligence to a software robot, in this case, that it is interacting real time with the users, maybe it's through a chat channel or through voice, or it's taking inputs from a sensor that the data is flowing in and it's triggering the robot. And the robot then, say if you are doing voice over, you're speaking with the robot and there's a voice assistant capability, the robot can then apply natural language understanding to figure out what is being asked, and it can maintain the state of that interaction and confirm with the user what the user wants to do. And then it goes and acts. Then that is, to me, is fuller robotics. Then the automation becomes robotics when you add that level of intelligence to sense and compute, by applying different artificial intelligence technologies with automation.
Great, perfect, thank you.
Sure. So let's move on. This is another important topic of debate in RPA, UI versus API. So is RPA only limited to UI automation? Basically, you see there are prominent tools like UiPath and Automation Anywhere. There's a heavy focus on UI as an interface for RPA. What about APIs? Is our API automation not RPA? Is it one versus the other? I mean, there are a lot of questions like that. So if you look at it fundamentally, so UI automation, obviously it's quicker to develop. It is a good option in case there is legacy application, which does not expose APIs to integrate. But on the other hand, API automation is faster when it comes to the execution speed. It is more scalable. It is a lot more reliable and stable automation. Whereas UI automation could be fragile and resource intensive and high maintenance. It is not possible to run it as a serverless code. You need an agent to be installed, which interacts with the UI elements. So all of those aspects are there, which are sort of, a slight downside of UI automation. But equally, API automation is perhaps, it's a little bit more technical. It requires more skilled developers. There's more investment cost from a development standpoint, and it's more complex to manage. So that is also there. So I would say, if you're looking for a tactical solution, that is to automate legacy applications where you don't have any APIs, you go for RPA. That is the right choice, and it at times is really good choice, and it can give a lot of good return. But if you're looking at newer cloud-based applications which are built on microservices architecture and will expose APIs by default, you want to maybe look at more longer term stable solution, and you want to go with APIs, instead of UI.
Mm-hmm.
So again, very interesting topic, solution architecture. So I'm heavily into designing. Design is a very key element. You don't want to miss that and jump straight into development. So solution architecture again. What do you have in an enterprise grade solution architecture? So this is a layered architecture, what I have on the slide. And this ensures scalability and reuse of your assets. So conceptually, so I've got 4 layers here. The top layer is your process layer, where your workflow design or business logic sits, which is in the form of the high level process steps the robot would perform. And this can be developed by a business user. It doesn't need technical skills, but business expertise. And you want this to be decoupled from your implementation layers. You don't want to mix it up with the technical implementation. And I see the technical implementation as at least 2 further layers. So one is application focused. So you build components which are centered around a particular application or different sections or pages within an application. So you build your components around that. And the second layer is focused around technology and technology integration. So if you are using technologies such as OCR or computer vision to extract, for example, information from something like a PDF file, so then you have separate component built for that purpose, and then you just reuse that across your automation assets. And then obviously at the bottom you have the tooling layer, which will be the whatever pre-built components you get from the vendor and the capabilities that are provided by the vendor, which has evolved a lot in the last 3-4 years. I've seen RPA tools are a lot more mature now. There's a lot of benefit in keeping this level of separation and having this layered architecture. It will give you a lot of flexibility in terms of who does what as well, bringing different roles, technical and non-technical, reducing the complexity and making it overall solution easy to maintain and enhance and so on. Okay, let's move to development. I'm conscious of time. Let's press ahead. So this is like one example of a framework, and you have a lot of these pre-configured templates and frameworks now available, which are really useful. So this is an example from Blue Prism, and they're typically components like a startup and tear down component, a data setup component, and the transactional component. The idea here is that if you're running an end-to-end unattended process, which with a lot of transactions to process in a day, as an example, you want a common setup and tear down, and also data setup component for all the transactions that needs to run in a period of time. And so they can be logically grouped together and run in a loop. And so you're not repeating those steps again, the startup and the tear down or the data setup. Obviously, the main process component to link it back with the solution architecture, that represents your process layer, which will then call the application or integration layers underneath and to execute the low-level steps within the process. And you want to separate out, just to mention, in terms of exception handling. So there is technical exceptions that might occur, or there may be business exceptions. So when it comes to technical exceptions, so say something like a page failed to load, you want to have some sort of retry mechanisms in place at that level, in the technical implementation layer. So you can isolate and resolve them locally, and you don't have to restart or re-execute the whole process end to end, as that will be a heavy overhead. But in case of a business exceptions, you do want to bubble it up to the process layer to this level, and fail the transaction and move to the next one. So just to bring out some of those best practices when it comes to development. So
Mr.
this
Sharma,
is.
Oh, sorry for interrupting. Can you drag your share bar on a little bit to the left or right? The bar of sharing on the, yes.
Is that okay?
Let me see. What, one bit more to the left of the right. The bar at the bottom of the screen, of your screen.
This one?
Yes, this one. To the left, or yes, yes, great, thank you.
Yeah, so I have an example of a framework for attended bot, but this is something I probably will skip given the time, because there's a lot of technical detail here, and it's difficult to cover in a short time. But just to mention, this is very different from what you do in an unattended framework. And here it is, you've got chatbot, you've got other intelligent technologies like machine learning and natural language processing, how you implement those, as to have the sense and computational and act. So bringing to life all of those three activities with a framework service which is very different, with some activity handlers which can understand different type of activities, like you want to query for certain existing automations from the platform, or you want to execute one. So this is a very different framework, but I don't think I've got time to cover this. Maybe as I said, I'll share the link to the articles behind these at the end, and you can go and have a read. I'll just press on with the following slide, and we can try and cover as much as we can. Hang on. Okay, so moving forward, just looking very quickly, getting into testing. So RPA is a low-code technology. Can you apply the same testing practices what you do in full code projects in RPA, like what I have on my slide, like a typical pyramid-based automated testing with more unit and integration testing at the bottom, and less UI level testing as an industry standard? Can you apply this to UI automation based RPA? Maybe not in the same sense. How do you do unit and integration testing if you don't if it's low code and if you don't use APIs and it's just purely UI? So most of the acceptance testing will be then manual. So it's very difficult to apply the same good code testing practices to low code. I mean, so that could be a pain point, just to highlight. And then also about non-functional testing of robots, such as performance or security or operational acceptance. Now, these are very important to consider, as well. So you don't want to get into some sort of a financial or reputational risk by not doing these things. You want to make sure your robot, like, if you're using legacy applications, that it does not overwhelm your legacy applications by hitting them at a very fast rate, that they can't cope up and they crash. We've seen examples of that in the news. There was an example of US one of the US departments who had that exact issue with RPA, and RPA got the bad name there. Similarly with security, you don't want any security vulnerabilities, that allow a cyber attack from a robot program. You want to test before. And also, like, if something fails, if a component fails, is it resilient enough to recover? Can it raise an alert for the operations team in any of the emergency? So that is also very important. And also, just to highlight, what about continuous deployment and continuous integration? Some of these good DevOps practices, because UI automation fundamentally will change over time constantly. So do you deploy it manually each time with each change, or do you automate and have some build and release pipelines for your RPA robots? So this is again is an interesting and developing area. And I have, if you read my blogs, I've got some latest developments which have happened in this area, and you can have a look. And then just to mention about the deployment, triggers and run configuration. What I wanted to highlight here is that the unattended automation, how you trigger, is very different again from attended. So you have your schedules or queues for the unattended, whereas for attended, you will have events that, event-driven execution where a user does something as a mouse or a keyboard click, and then that will trigger a robot. And it could be some interactions. It could be based on interactions, like, that a user is invoking a robot based on a chat or a voice interaction. And then that is the idea, is to bring a robot in the loop, which is opposite of human in the loop, which applies in the context of unattended RPA. So the human in the loop is about having notifications and handoffs between robot and the human when it comes to fulfilling longer end-to-end process transactions. So this is interesting. I mean, this, looking at the two sides of the coin, how they're different. And then if you're trying to achieve both of these as hybrid RPA, I mean, this is a new term you might have heard about, hybrid RPA. And it's easier said than done that you do both. But then to be able to do both unattended and attended, it requires a much broader platform that can handle, as some of these differences in terms of triggers or run configuration or how you develop, etc., etc. But you can look at, one good thing is, if you're doing hybrid, is you can look at converting one form into the other. So for instance, you might have started your journey bottom up, and you might have started building attended task automations. And when you have a lot of those, you might want to join them up, and you might want to create an end-to-end process automation and move it to the unattended space. So that is like, progression from one to the other, which is interesting, which is entirely possible if you've got a central broad platform that can support both. And that is one of the ways to scale RPA. And then, so this is very quickly the use of mobile apps. So when it comes to execution, we are seeing this convergence of using more digital devices in our lives, and also in RPA now, how you can access and execute robots easily, when from anywhere. So the use cases like, you can trigger a robot, or you can, or the platform can send you a notification on your app, if there's a problem, or you want to just view the statistics of the day. So, a mobile app is a very handy sort of tool to interact with the platform and do some meaningful use cases. And so we're seeing this coming out, and we've seen major vendors have come out with apps, mobile apps, and they're increasingly in use now, and we'll see this, the use increasing. And lastly, before I get into the final couple of slides, this is looking at the final phase of optimization. As I look at it, there's two levels. So how do you make your RPA initiatives more effective? Um, and the question is then also, how do you move to next level? The level 1 is optimization to me, and level 2 is transformation, which is what I'm trying to explain in this slide. That level 1 is essentially you are still in an as-is process state, but it's optimized. You've reduced your cost. You've made it more efficient from by having implemented RPA. But really, you're looking at digitally transforming your operations, and to go to a 2B state through innovation. And you're talking about both your business as well as your technology landscape when you're looking at transformation. And I've mentioned some of these, like, areas, broad areas for level 2. What changes? So moving from cost-centric to customer-centric models, or breaking the silos within our organizations, like front office, back office, but rather than that, having joined up processes and integrating different pieces like people, process, technology, bringing them together and accomplish end-to-end customer-focused journey. So that is, from a business perspective, I see some of the trends. From a technology perspective, obviously, you're looking at moving away from legacy systems and data and things like on-premise infrastructures and monolithic architectures to your digital channels and cloud infrastructures and distributed architectures. So just a way to depict these different trends and how these trends are evolving when you look at business and when you look at technology. I see this very, fit into this very interesting double helix model, um, where on one hand, so you have your as is business landscape. It is in increasing pressure to be integrated. You integrate your current siloed processes and structures and join them up and make them intelligent. But on the other hand, when you look at the technology landscape, there is opposite forces which are trying to disintegrate technology. So from monolithic architectures and on-premise large infrastructures, you want to disintegrate and explode into multiple channels and as a service economy and microservices and so on. So those are opposite trends. One is disintegration, one is integration, and so that is happening as a life cycle. And we might come back full circle and it's opposite, in maybe 10 years, but that's what I see happening. And then, as we've spoken about already about the level 2, how the integrated automation, Gartner calls it hyper automation. There's Forrester call it digital process automation. Whatever name you like, it's about combining different automation tools needed to drive any such transformation initiatives. And so I've got some of these technologies here, what are part of an integrated intelligent operation from an automation perspective. So you've got IBPMS, which is an intelligent BPM, or integration as a service, which is about APIs. Then all the AI technologies put together. Then you have all of your UX or low-code application development apps put together, and then RPA. But keeping aside the hype of RPA, you realize RPA is just a very small part of this very broad intelligent automation landscape. Maybe 10% is what I believe. And if you look at this from lenses of innovation, I as an innovation strategist, I see these different technologies can drive different level of innovation in an organization simultaneously. So incremental innovation, making things cheaper, faster, and better, where RPA fits in. But then you have radical innovation, where you are, which is achieved by adopting disruptive technologies like AI, or by reinventing your business models, like by applying BPM and align to new or emerging market conditions. So that is a different level of innovation. And then also there's the architectural innovation, which is about how you can integrate existing technologies and components in different ways and in new ways and generate value. And as I see, this is where integration platforms fit in and APIs fit in. So you might want to drive all of those different innovation streams within an organization simultaneously. So that is one angle from an innovation perspective. And also, just to mention, most of these technologies, if I put it from a, and look at it from a different lens. So in this case, I'm looking at it from what are the outcomes. So employee productivity as an outcome where RPA fits in, or customer experience where UX come in, or end-to-end process orchestration where BPM might fit in, or machine intelligence where all the AI will fit in. All of these technologies and the platforms that support these are moving towards low code and cloud. And so cloud becomes like the stepping stone for low code. And so to reduce the amount of traditional hand coding, accelerate the delivery of business applications, and allow wider range of people to contribute into application development, and not just formal programmers. I think that is a trend which is coming heavily, and we've seen all of the major software vendors and all of these technology categories are fastly moving and becoming low code. Interestingly, RPA is not at the moment, if I compare, is not as effective as low code as some of the others, like your low code application platforms, what Microsoft or Amazon have got. That is really low code in terms of how you go about in building them. So RPA has a way to go, and there's some limitations given what RPA, how you do RPA. And finally, um, I just wanted to sum everything together and look at these trends, 6 trends, when I try to put them together, looking at it from these 3 fundamental organizational dimensions of people, process, technology, and looking at the intersection points and aspects which are central to the equation. So just to leave you with these thoughts, I see 6 trends, that are going into the future. Obviously, we talked about integrated automation, which is, and then it's key to bring people and automation technologies together, simplify it. Low code development is another key trend, which is breaking the institutional silos and having non-technical staff getting into application development, speeding it up, making it more iterative. Then customer centricity is a big theme, focusing on customer outcomes. Digital channels, digital experience, all the channels, application, and devices, that is exploding. That will continue to happen. And then you've got AI or machine intelligence at the core, that is fundamentally changing the impact that technology is having. And then finally, there's the cloud and platforms as common enterprise level microservices ready platforms that I see is at the core. So that is, look from my perspective, looking into the future of automation and RPA. What are we seeing? What is happening? I'll stop there. I think I've stretched maybe 5-10 minutes over. but I hope that was interesting. And as I said, I've got a link to my automation blog post over here on my company's website, SQA Consulting. There's an index where you can find maybe all of these. For these slides, you can find an article, and I can quickly show. This is where it is. This is the SQA website. If you go on there, you will find the index. Or if you look for in this robotic process automation section, you will find all the links to all of the the detailed articles, and you can read about it. You can follow me on LinkedIn, and if you've got any questions, reach out to me. I'll be happy to share my experience, and yeah, that's me. Hanan, back to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sharma. Please follow the Young Solutions page on LinkedIn. I'm very happy. And I have a quick question. Much is said about low-code automation. In Brazil, we have some robotic solutions, and the Young Solutions are the one that are not low-code, and that can implement at the same speed and even handle more complex projects. In your opinion, do these tools work, or will only low codes have a future, I say?
So that is a very interesting question. I come from a technology background. I've done coding for a lot of years, but for surely low code. So if I let me just share, if I can again, and I'll go back to my presentation.
Okay.
And going back to this slide, the whole idea of low code is the trend to sort of break the silos between business and technologies, bringing them together. And
I'm sorry, I'm not seeing yet your share. You share again?
Maybe it's still coming.
That's okay. Okay.
Yeah. So I think the whole trend, the fundamental basis underneath low code is, breaking those silos between business and technology, and having a common understanding, common language, and newer processes which are iterative in nature, to develop applications, business applications speedier. It's just, that's a way to bring those two roles together as as a collective and work. So as a concept, and what we're seeing, it is working. It is similar to what we've seen as agile and DevOps pick up, and the low code is a similar thread. Is a related thread. That is the fundamental reason why it's picking up, and we're seeing pretty much all of these different technologies when it comes to integration platforms, or when it comes to app development, or when it comes to even machine learning and AI. You would see Google, Amazon, Microsoft, all of them have converted their solutions as low code as possible. So so the use can be maximized, and it's democratized, and it is becoming faster and quicker for people, and more collaborative. So that is surely a trend which is continued to be there in that direction. Having said that, there's obviously, when we were looking at the solution architecture, you obviously will always have multiple layers in the solution. So there is going to be the low code layer, but there's also going to be the code layer underneath, or some more complex layer where you would need proper development skills and more technical and skills and professionals working at that level. So I see that as you know, a collaborative or collective effort and part of a larger model, you know, and solution architecture. So both work together. There is the full code implementation of building the basic components, and then there is the low code where it's about reusing them in a business sense and putting them to use quickly. And I think both are needed and they will go hand in hand. And that's the idea, you know, bringing them together. Low code sitting at the top does not mean there is not any code underneath. Obviously, there is code underneath low code, you know, and somebody is going to write that. So I see that as an interesting, you know, it's a mix, and both needs to be there. And
Yeah.
and the more low code, the more faster, the more efficient, the more collaborative it becomes. You know, that is the driving factor.
Great. Let me see if anyone wants to ask any questions. 1 minute, please. Pessoal, alguém tem alguma pergunta para fazer para o Deepak? Fica à vontade. Estamos finalizando com ele aqui. Deepak, the points covered were very interesting. It is factor necessary to understand the difference on the best way to implement depending on the client's architecture. The panel before yours, we were talking about fully automation service and how it impacts the customer experience. You touch on a point that is important to talk about, which the organization of what is to plan first, then implement in the best way. Unfortunately, in Brazil, we have the culture of going out, and forget to plan a few times. Let me see any question.
Yeah, I mean, just to reflect on that, I think that is a very important point, that planning and design are very important aspects. And a lot of the time, people rush through them or do half a job, especially on the design aspect. I also see in RPA, the other phase is testing, or the deployment or release phase is still, you know, is not industry standard. They're not the tools and the proprietariness restricts some of those best practices, which will generally be there in full code development. But I think things are evolving and they're moving in the right direction.
Cool, great. No askings. Then I would like to thank you again, Mr. Sharma, and say that you can come back when you want to talk to us. I'm very, very happy to talk to you today, and very thank you for watching you.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. My pleasure to share my experience. Thank you very much.
The pleasure is mine. Thank you very much, Mr. Sharma. Goodbye.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.